The Ozarks didn't just hold heat, they magnified it, trapping the humid breath of the Mississippi Valley in the deep, limestone hollows until the air felt heavy enough to bruise. It was late August, the time of year when the Arkansas woods fell silent, the cicadas too exhausted to sing and the birds hiding deep within the canopy to escape the oppressive, wet wool blanket of the afternoon. Elias Thorne paused, wiping a hand across his forehead. The sweat mixed with the fine layer of red dirt that coated his skin, turning into a muddy paste that stung his eyes. He was 65 years old, but today, standing on the edge of the ravine known to the locals as Devil's Throat, he felt 100. His knees, ruined by decades of laying concrete and bending over garden beds, popped audibly as he shifted his weight. The metal detector in his right hand, a battered Garrett at Pro that had seen better decades, felt like it weighed 50 pounds. The rubber grip was slick with perspiration, and the duct tape holding the battery pack together was beginning to peel in the heat. He adjusted the headphones, wincing as the foam pads pressed against his ears. The static hum was a comfort, a white noise that drowned out the more terrifying sounds playing on a loop in his head. The rhythmic, mechanical wheeze of the ventilator in room 304 at the county hospital, and the sharp, pitying tone of the bank manager, Mr. Henderson, telling him that the grace period was over. 30 days, Henderson had said, sliding the foreclosure notice across the polished mahogany desk as if it were a breath mint. 30 days, Elias or the sheriff puts the lock on the gate. It's not personal. It's just policy. It was always policy. Policy didn't care that the Thorne family had plowed this rocky earth since 1920. Policy didn't care that Martha, his wife of 40 years, was fighting a war against her own lungs. A war that burned through their savings faster than a wildfire through dry pine. Policy was a clean, sterile word for the end of the world. Elias spat on the ground. The saliva sizzled on a dry rock. He wasn't going to let policy win. Not today. He looked down into the throat. It was a jagged scar in the landscape, a dried-up creek bed flanked by steep walls of shale and tangled kudzu. It was dangerous terrain, infested with copperheads and unstable footing, the kind of place sensible men avoided. But sensible men didn't have dying wives and empty bank accounts. Sensible men didn't believe in the Brigade 19 gold. The legend was the town's favorite joke. Every drunk at the Blackwood Tavern knew the story of the Confederate supply train that vanished in 1864, carrying a payroll of gold bullion meant for the troops in Missouri. Most said it was stolen by Union raiders. Others said the soldiers buried it and died of smallpox before they could retrieve it. Elias had spent 20 years studying the old topography maps, layering them over modern satellite imagery, tracing the erosion patterns. He knew the water tables had shifted. He knew that what was once a ridge was now this gully. If the gold was anywhere, it had washed down into the throat, buried under a century and a half of sediment. He began the descent. The slope was treacherous. Loose shale skittered under his boots, tumbling down into the shadows below. He moved with the slow, deliberate caution of a man who couldn't afford a broken ankle. The canopy above was thick, blocking out the sun, plunging the bottom of the ravine into a twilight gloom. The air down here was cooler, but it smelled stagnant. The scent of rotting wet leaves, fungus, and standing water. He reached the bottom and switched the detector's sensitivity to max. The machine chirped, a low, erratic grumble. Iron. Just trash. Probably an old rusted horseshoe or a piece of a tractor that had washed down during the flood of '98. Elias ignored it. He wasn't looking for iron. He was looking for the clean, high conductivity of gold or silver. He began to sweep. Left, right, left, right. The motion was muscle memory, a trance state he had perfected over thousands of hours. His eyes scanned the ground, reading the story of the earth. A slight depression there meant soft soil. A mound of rocks there meant a washout. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. His arm burned. The only things he had found were 2 pull tabs from beer cans dating back to the 70s and a brooding silence that seemed to press in on him. Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep into his chest. Maybe the town was right. Maybe he was just a crazy old man chasing ghosts while his real life crumbled to dust. Go home, Elias. A voice in his head whispered. It sounded like his father. Go sit by Martha's bed. Hold her hand. Stop digging in the dirt like a child. He stopped, leaning on his shovel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting back the sting of tears. He could see Martha's face, pale and translucent against the hospital pillows. She had smiled at him this morning, a weak, fluttering thing. Go find it, Eli, she had whispered through her oxygen mask. Go find our luck. She didn't believe in the gold. She just wanted him out of the room so he wouldn't see her in pain. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. She was dying and he was out here playing pirate. Damn it, he screamed, his voice cracking, echoing off the canyon walls. He swung the detector wildly, slamming the coil against a mossy boulder. Scree! The sound didn't come from his mouth. It tore through his headphones, a high-pitched, solid, unwavering scream of audio feedback. It was so loud he ripped the headphones off his ears, letting them hang around his neck. Elias froze. He stared at the machine. The digital display was maxed out. The target ID cursor was locked firmly on the far right of the scale. Non-ferrous, highly conductive, and massive. The adrenaline hit him like a shot of amphetamine, washing away the fatigue, the ache in his knees, the despair. He looked at the ground. There was nothing there but a patch of ferns and undisturbed clay. Whatever it was deep. He fell to his knees, disregarding the sharp rocks. He grabbed his Lesche digging tool, a serrated knife trowel hybrid, and stabbed the earth. The ground was hard, compacted by years of rain and sun. He switched to the short-handled shovel strapped to his pack. He dug with a ferocity that bordered on mania. Dirt flew over his shoulder. He cut through thick roots, snapping them with the blade. He leveraged rocks out of their sockets, panting, grunting, sweat dripping from the tip of his nose onto the red clay. Please, he chanted silently. Please be the payroll. Please be the bullion. Just one bar. Just one bar is $50,000. 2 bars and the house is safe. 5 bars and Martha goes to the specialist in Zurich. 2 feet down. The hole was now waist-deep for a kneeling man. The smell of the earth changed, becoming older, mineral-rich. Clang. The sound was dull, heavy. Metal on metal. Elias stopped. The silence of the woods rushed back in, deafening. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wiped his hands on his jeans, trembling. Slowly, gently, he used the hand trowel to scrape away the remaining layer of clay. It wasn't gold. Gold didn't look like this. Gold didn't have a matte black finish. Gold didn't have seamless, welded corners. He uncovered a surface about 2 feet wide. It was a case. Not a wooden chest rotting with age, but a sleek industrial container made of some high-tech alloy, titanium or high-impact polymer. It looked utterly alien in this primitive hole, like an artifact dropped from a passing spaceship. Elias stared at it, his mind racing to make sense of the geometry. This wasn't Civil War era. This was modern, maybe military, a weapon. He brushed the dirt off a small, rectangular plate near the handle. There were no markings, no U.S. property, no serial numbers, just a smooth, featureless surface. Logic told him to stop. Logic told him that finding a modern, buried, high-tech case in the middle of nowhere was a recipe for disaster. This was how people disappeared. This was drug runner territory. But logic had no place in a world where Martha was dying. He reached down and gripped the handle. He pulled. It was heavy, incredibly dense, but the soil around it was loose enough now that he could shift it. With a grunt of exertion that strained every tendon in his back, he hauled the case up and out of the hole, flipping it onto the fern-covered bank. He sat back, chest heaving, staring at the black monolith. "What are you?" he whispered. He ran his fingers along the seam. There was no padlock. Instead, there was a biometric scanner, a small glass square that had been brutally drilled out. Someone had bypassed the security manually. A jagged hole remained where the lock mechanism should have been. Elias took a deep breath, the air tasting of ozone and wet pine. He reached for the latches. They were heavy, silent things that opened with a smooth, hydraulic hiss. Click, hiss. He lifted the lid. He expected drugs. Bricks of cocaine wrapped in plastic. That was the currency of the hills these days. Or maybe cash. Stacks of rotting bills. But as the lid rose, revealing the contents to the dim light of the ravine, Elias felt a wave of confusion wash over him, followed immediately by a cold, prickling sensation of dread. There was no gold. There were no drugs. The interior was lined with shock-absorbent foam. Nestled inside were rows of hard drives, each labeled with a piece of masking tape and a date. Beside them lay 3 thick, leather-bound ledgers, the kind old-school accountants used. And on top of the pile, scattered like playing cards, were photographs. Elias picked one up. It was a high-resolution surveillance shot. It showed a man in a suit shaking hands with another man in a parking garage. He recognized the man in the suit. It was Senator Caldwell, the state's beloved law and order politician. He picked up another photo, a shipping container yard. Women, dozens of them huddled in the back of a truck. Their faces were blurred by the motion, but the fear was sharp, focused. He opened one of the ledgers. His eyes scanned the columns. Date, July 12th. Asset, 40 units. Transit, Laredo to Little Rock. Payout, $400,000. Recipient, Aztec Logistics. He turned the page. Payment, Sheriff Department silence. $50,000 monthly. Elias dropped the ledger as if it had burned him. He scrambled back, crab-walking away from the case until his back hit a tree. He knew what this was. He was an old man, but he wasn't naive. He watched the news. This wasn't treasure. This was a death warrant. This was the insurance policy of a monster. The raw data of a criminal empire, human trafficking, political bribery, money laundering, buried here to keep it safe or perhaps to blackmail the powerful. He looked at the case again, revulsion warring with curiosity. He should run. He should bury it back up and run until his lungs exploded. But then, his eye caught the edge of a yellow manila envelope stuck to the inner lining of the lid. A name was scrawled on it in black marker. The Sarah file. The world stopped. The birds, the wind, the throbbing of his own heart. Everything vanished into a vacuum of silence. Sarah, his daughter, the girl who had packed a bag 10 years ago, shouted that she hated this town, hated the farm, hated him, and walked out the door. He had spent a decade waiting for a phone call that never came. The police said she had likely gone to the city, got mixed up in drugs, vanished into the cracks of the system. Elias crawled back to the box. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely grip the envelope. He tore it open. A single photograph slid out. It wasn't a child anymore. It was a woman. She looked older, harder. Her eyes rimmed with dark circles, a bruise fading on her cheekbone. She was sitting in a room with concrete walls, looking at the camera with a defiance that broke his heart. It was her. It was Sarah. A sound cut through the silence, sharp and alien. BZZZT. BZZZT. Elias jumped, dropping the photo. Inside the case, taped next to the hard drives, a small, ruggedized satellite phone lit up. It vibrated against the metal casing, a rhythmic drumming that sounded like a countdown. The screen glowed a sickly green in the twilight. It didn't show a number. It just showed a single word. Found. Elias stared at the phone. He looked at the photo of his daughter in the dirt. He looked at the trees around him, which suddenly felt less like a shelter and more like a cage. The shadows seemed to stretch, reaching for him. He wasn't a hunter anymore. He was prey. Slowly, Elias reached out and picked up the phone. The vibration of the satellite phone against Elias's palm felt less like a mechanical buzz and more like the tremor of a warning shot. In the suffocating silence of Devil's Throat, the green glow of the screen cast his weathered face in a sickly, spectral light, deepening the hollows beneath his eyes and highlighting the grime in the creases of his forehead. Found. The word pulsed on the screen, a digital heartbeat. Elias stared at it, his thumb hovering over the answer button. His instincts, honed by years of navigating the treacherous geography of the Ozarks and the even more treacherous geography of poverty, screamed at him to throw the device into the creek, bury the case, and run until his heart burst. But he couldn't. The photograph of Sarah lay in the dirt at his feet, her defiant eyes staring up at the canopy of leaves that blocked out the sky. That photo was a tether, an iron chain binding him to this moment, to this black box, and to whoever was on the other end of the line. He pressed the button. He didn't speak. He just held the phone to his ear, his breathing ragged and shallow, waiting. For a long moment, there was only the sound of digital static, a hollow hissing like wind blowing through an empty tunnel. Then, a voice cut through. It wasn't the voice of a monster, nor was it the growl of a thug. It was smooth, calm, and terrifyingly synthetic, processed through enough filters to strip away any trace of gender, accent, or humanity. "Breathing is a good sign, Mr. Thorne," the voice said. "It means you haven't done anything foolish yet." Elias froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him cold despite the oppressive heat of the ravine. They knew his name. "Who is this?" Elias croaked. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, dry, brittle, like dead leaves crushing underfoot. "That is the wrong question," the voice replied. The tone was conversational, almost bored, as if ordering coffee. "The right question is, what is your life worth? Or perhaps, more accurately, what is Martha's life worth?" Elias gripped the phone so hard the plastic casing creaked. The mention of his wife wasn't a threat. It was a demonstration of omnipotence. It was the voice telling him that the walls of his life were made of glass. "If you touch her," Elias started, a low growl rising in his throat. "We don't need to touch anyone, Elias. We are simply accountants of consequence. And right now, you have stumbled into a transaction that does not concern you. You have opened a door that was meant to stay shut. But we are pragmatic. We believe in compensation for accidental labor." "I don't want your money," Elias lied. He looked at the titanium case, at the hard drives that held the secrets of men who traded in human lives. "Don't lie to me. I know about the foreclosure. I know about the experimental treatment in Zurich that your insurance denied last Tuesday. I know that you are standing in a hole in the ground, 65 years old, with $68 in your checking account and a wife who is drowning in her own fluids." The cruelty of the truth hit Elias like a physical blow. He swayed, steadying himself against the muddy bank of the ravine. "Turn around, Elias," the voice commanded. "Look at the twin oak trees 10 yards to your north. The ones with the lightning scar." Elias turned slowly, his boots squelching in the mud. He knew the trees. He had walked past them 1,000 times over the years. "There is a root system at the base of the left tree," the voice continued. "Dig." "Why?" "Because I am offering you a choice. You can be a hero, Elias, and heroes usually die tragic, painful deaths that solve nothing. Or you can be a husband. Dig." Elias hesitated, then lowered the phone. He dragged his shovel over to the oaks. The ground here was softer, disturbed recently but covered artfully with dead leaves. He thrust the shovel into the earth. It hit something soft almost immediately. He pulled back the soil. Buried less than a foot deep was a heavy, military-grade waterproof duffel bag. It was the kind used by rafters, completely sealed. "Open it," the voice said in his ear. Elias unzipped the bag. The smell hit him first, the unique, intoxicating scent of ink and linen. Inside, stacked in tight, vacuum-sealed bricks, were $100 bills. Row after row of Benjamin Franklins, staring up at him with judgmental eyes. $2 million, the voice said. Untraceable, non-consecutive serial numbers. It was a drop payment for a courier who is no longer in our employ. It's yours, Elias. Take it. Walk away. Leave the case in the hole. Go home, pack your truck. Drive Martha to the best hospital in the world. Save her. Live the rest of your life in comfort. Elias stared at the money. His hands trembled as he reached out and touched a bundle. Felt solid. Felt like salvation. In his mind, the scene played out with agonizing clarity. He saw himself walking into the hospital room, not as a failure, but as a savior. He saw the look on Dr. Evans' face when he slapped the cash on the counter. He saw Martha breathing easy, the color returning to her cheeks. The two of them sitting on a porch somewhere cool, far away from the humidity and the debt and the shame. It was everything he had ever prayed for. God had finally answered, but the devil was the one delivering the check. And the case? Elias whispered. The case stays. It contains proprietary information. Nothing that concerns a retired carpenter. Elias looked back at the black titanium box lying open in the mud. He walked back to it, the phone still pressed to his ear. The money was singing to him, a siren song of safety, but the photo of Sarah was screaming. He crouched down by the case again. He needed to know. If he was going to sell his soul, he needed to know the price. "Don't look at the files, Elias," the voice warned, the tone sharpening slightly. "Take the money and leave." Elias ignored him. With one hand holding the phone, he used the other to flip open the ledger he had dropped earlier. He turned the pages past the financial transactions, past the payoffs to judges and sheriffs. He found the section labeled Logistics, Human Assets. His finger traced the lines. It was a catalog of misery. Names, ages, pickup locations, drop-off points. And then he found it. Entry 11-04. Asset, Sarah Thorne. Acquisition, Interstate 40. Mile marker 112. Status, processed. Processed. The word was so sterile, so industrial. It stripped his daughter of her humanity, reducing her to a unit of inventory. He flipped the page, his vision blurring. He found a subfile clipped to the page. It was a scan of a handwritten note. He recognized the handwriting instantly. The loops of the Y, the sharp crossing of the T. It was a letter Sarah had written. "Dad, Mom, I messed up. I wanted to come home. I was trying to get to the bus station. A man offered me a ride. Please, if you find this, tell them I didn't run away again. I was coming back." The letter ended there. A sound escaped Elias's throat. A low, keening wail that he quickly stifled with his hand. She hadn't abandoned them. She was coming home. 10 years of thinking she hated him. 10 years of wondering why she never called. And she was coming home. She was coming back. Elias whispered into the phone. The sorrow in his voice was gone, replaced by a cold, jagged rage. The voice on the other end sighed. A digital, impatient sound. "That was a long time ago, Elias. She is gone. The past is dead. But Martha is alive. The money is real. Do not throw away the living for the sake of the dead." Elias looked at the duffel bag of money. $2 million. The price of his daughter. The price of his silence. He imagined taking the money. He imagined sitting by Martha's bed, holding her hand, knowing that every breath she took was paid for with the suffering of girls like Sarah. He imagined looking into his wife's eyes and having to hide the truth, that their daughter hadn't run away, that she had been stolen, and he had taken a payoff from the thieves. He couldn't do it. He would rather die. He would rather Martha die knowing he tried to do the right thing than live knowing he was a coward. "You're right," Elias said, his voice steadying. "The past is dead." He reached down and slammed the lid of the titanium case shut. The hydraulic hiss sounded like the cocking of a gun. He latched it. "But I'm not," Elias said. "Elias?" the voice said, the calm veneer cracking, revealing a steel edge of menace. "Think about what you are doing. Look up." Elias looked up. High above the canopy, barely visible through the gaps in the pine needles, a drone hovered. It was small, silent, a black cruciform shape against the gray sky. "I see you, Elias. I can have a team at your location in 20 minutes. I can have a team at the hospital in 10. Take the money." Elias looked at the drone. He raised his middle finger. "Come and get it," he snarled. He hung up the phone and crushed it under the heel of his boot, grinding the electronics into the mud until sparks died out. The silence of the woods returned, but it was different now. It was no longer the heavy, humid silence of nature. It was the held breath of a predator before the strike. Elias moved. He didn't take the money. He left the bag open, the millions of dollars exposed to the coming rain. He grabbed the titanium case. It was heavy, 40 pounds of solid evidence, an awkward, boxy weight that threw off his center of balance. He couldn't go back up the way he came. That was the logical route, the way back to his truck. They would expect that. They would have the roads covered. He had to go deeper. He swung the case onto his shoulder, the strap digging into his collarbone. He turned south, following the creek bed deeper into the limestone labyrinth of the Ozarks. He knew these woods. He had hunted deer here since he was 12. He knew where the caves were. He knew where the cell service died and where the thermal imaging of a drone would be confused by the dense canopy and the heat radiating from the rocks. As he began to run, a slow, shambling jog that was all his arthritic knees could manage, the first drop of rain hit his cheek. It was cold. The sky opened up. Within seconds, the drizzle turned into a deluge. The rain came down in sheets, washing away the sweat and the dirt, washing away his tracks. It was a blessing and a curse. It would hide him from the drones, but it would turn the creek bed into a slick, deadly chute of mud. Elias slipped, his boot finding no purchase on a wet rock. He went down hard, his shoulder slamming into the canyon wall. The pain was blinding. He gasped, tasting copper. He lay there for a second, the rain hammering against his back, the heavy case pinning him down. "Stay down," the weakness whispered. "Just stay here. Let them find you. It's over." He gritted his teeth. He thought of Sarah's letter. "I was coming back. I'm bringing you home. Baby girl," he grunted. He forced himself up. He wasn't Elias the failed farmer anymore. He wasn't Elias the grieving father. He was a soldier again. He was Combat Engineer Thorne, 1st Infantry Division, and he had a mission. He checked his wrist. He didn't have a smartwatch or a GPS. He had an old Timex. For 15 p.m. Sunset was at 7:30. He had 3 hours of light, maybe less with the storm. He needed a weapon. He had his digging tool, a serrated blade sharp enough to cut roots, maybe sharp enough to cut flesh, but against guns it was a joke. He needed to be smart. He scrambled up a deer trail, clawing his way out of the ravine. He needed high ground. He needed to see them coming. As he crested the ridge, lungs burning like they were filled with broken glass, he paused behind a thick oak. He looked back down into Devil's Throat. Through the rain, he saw movement. 2 black shapes were moving through the trees near the spot where he had found the case. They moved with fluid, tactical precision. They weren't local cops. These were professionals. They wore tactical vests and carried rifles that looked like shadows in their hands. They stopped at the hole. One of them knelt by the money bag. He looked up, scanning the ridge. Elias pulled his head back, pressing his spine against the rough bark of the oak. They were fast, faster than he expected. He realized then that he couldn't just run. He couldn't outrun men half his age with lungs full of youth and legs full of power. He had to outthink them. He had to use the only advantage he had, the land itself. The Ozarks were old. They were full of forgotten mine shafts, hidden sinkholes, and ridges that led to nowhere. He had to lead them into the dark. He took a deep breath, checked the weight of the case on his shoulder, and turned away from the ravine. He headed toward the limestone caves of Razorback Ridge. It was dangerous terrain, prone to flash floods, but it was his only chance. As he moved, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. A cheap, prepaid flip phone he kept in his glove box for emergencies. He had grabbed it before leaving the truck. He flipped it open. 1 bar of signal. He dialed the number he had memorized from a documentary he watched 6 months ago about the FBI's crusade against organized crime. He didn't know if it would work. He didn't know if anyone would answer. Ring, ring. FBI Little Rock Field Office. A receptionist's voice answered, sounding impossibly calm against the backdrop of Elias's reality. "I need to speak to Assistant Director Miller," Elias shouted over the wind. Code red. Tell him I found the lost ledger." "Sir, I can't just connect you to." "Tell him the Brigade 19 legend is real, but it's not gold," Elias yelled, desperation clawing at his throat. "Tell him I have the Sinaloa backup drive, and tell him they are going to kill me." There was a pause, a click. "This is Miller. A gruff, tired voice came on the line. "Who is this?" "My name is Elias Thorne," he panted, cresting the ridge as lightning split the sky, illuminating the path ahead in a flash of stark white. "I'm in the Blackwood Ranges. I have the case, and I have wolves on my tail. I need extraction. Listen to me, Thorne." Miller's voice was sharp, authoritative. "Do not go home. Do not go to the police. Keep moving. Can you make it to the old iron bridge on Route 9? "The suspension bridge?" Elias asked. "That's 10 miles through hell. It's the only place I can land a chopper or get a team to you without being seen. Midnight. Can you make it to midnight, Elias?" Elias looked at the dark woods ahead, then back at the shadows moving up the hill behind him. 10 miles, a storm, hill team, and a 65-year-old body running on spite and adrenaline. "I'll be there," Elias said. He snapped the phone shut and vanished into the trees. The hunt was on. The rain didn't just fall. It hammered the earth with the fury of a biblical judgment, turning the Ozark canopy into a deafening drum of wet leaves and snapping branches. Through the monochromatic gray of the storm, a different kind of predator moved. Vargas adjusted the strap of his rifle, wiping the rainwater from the lens of his optical scope. He was a man carved from granite and indifference, a former operator for a private military contractor that didn't exist on paper. He hated this environment. The jungle he could handle, the desert he understood, but the Ozark backcountry was a chaotic, tangled mess of thorns, limestone, and unpredictable topography. He tapped the side of his headset. "Thermal is awash," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "The rain is cooling the ground too fast. It's a ghost town on the sensors. Visual confirmation only. The voice of the coordinator, the synthetic voice Elias had heard on the phone, crackled in his ear. Target is 65 years old, untrained, and carrying 40 pounds of dead weight. He shouldn't be hard to run down. You have him boxed in at the ridge." Vargas looked down at the mud. A boot print, deep and uneven, filled rapidly with brown water. The tread was worn, the stride length short. It was the gait of an exhausted man. "He's limping," Vargas noted, signaling to the two men behind him. "Left leg. He's heading for the limestone caves. He thinks he can hide in the rock." One of the men, a younger mercenary named Cale, smirked. "Let him run. Old Hart will probably give out before we even get a clean shot." Vargas didn't smile. He had seen the file. Elias Thorne wasn't just a farmer. He was a former combat engineer. Vietnam era. The man had cleared minefields with a stick and a prayer. He might be old, his joints rusted by time, but the instinct to survive was a muscle that never atrophied. "Don't get cocky," Vargas warned, racking the charging handle of his carbine. "An animal is most dangerous when it knows it's dying. Spread out. 10-meter intervals. Flush him out." They moved into the tree-line, silent shadows cutting through the storm, closing the net. A mile ahead, Elias was indeed dying, or at least parts of him felt like they were. His lungs were burning bags of acid. Every breath was a ragged gasp that tasted of iron and bile. The titanium case, strapped across his chest with a makeshift harness made from his belt, slammed against his ribs with every step, a brutal metronome counting down the seconds of his life. He slipped on a patch of wet moss, his bad knee buckling. He went down hard, face first into the slurry of pine needles and mud. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He lay there, gasping, the rain pounding against his back like icy fists. "Stay down," the mud whispered to him. "It's soft here. It's quiet. Just close your eyes." Elias squeezed his eyes shut. For a second, the roar of the storm faded, replaced by the sound of a screen door slamming shut. "I hate you." The memory was 10 years old, but it was sharper than the rocks digging into his hip. He saw Sarah standing on the porch, a duffel bag over her shoulder. She was 18, furious, beautiful, and so terrifyingly young. "You care more about this stupid farm than you do about me. You're just going to dig in the dirt until you die, and I'm not going to watch it." "Sarah, wait," Elias had said, but he hadn't moved. He had stood there, covered in grease from the tractor, and watched her walk down the driveway. He had let her go. He had thought she would cool off. He had thought she would be back for dinner. He hadn't known it was the last time he would see her alive. "I'm sorry," Elias choked out into the mud. The water rising around his face was cold, shocking him back to the present. He wasn't on the porch. He was in the kill zone. He forced himself up, his fingers clawing into the roots of a hickory tree. He dragged his body upright, the pain in his knee flashing white-hot. He checked his watch. 5:30 p.m. The light was fading fast, the storm turning the afternoon into an early twilight. He was at the base of Razorback Ridge, a jagged spine of limestone that rose 300 feet out of the forest floor. It was riddled with caves and crevices, a geological honeycomb. If he could get up there, he could lose them in the dark. But the ascent was steep, an almost vertical scramble over loose scree and slick rock. He started to climb. The case swung wildly, threatening to pull him off the face of the cliff. He jammed his fingers into cracks in the rock, ignoring the way the stone tore his nails. He was a machine made of pain and will. Left hand, right foot, pull, breathe. Halfway up, he stopped. A sound cut through the thunder. Not the chaotic noise of nature, but the rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of boots on gravel. He froze, pressing his body flat against the cold stone face. He looked down. Through the veil of rain, he saw them. 3 figures at the base of the ridge. They weren't rushing. They were scanning the cliff face, their weapons raised. He went up. A voice drifted up on the wind. "I see fresh slide marks." Elias's heart hammered against the titanium case. He was exposed, a sitting duck on a gray wall. He looked up. Above him, about 20 feet, was a small overhang, a shelf of rock jutting out, covered in a tangle of thick roots from an ancient oak tree clinging to the cliff edge. The heavy rain had washed away the soil beneath the roots, leaving a massive pile of loose boulders and shale precariously balanced, held back only by the tension of the wood. The engineer in him woke up. He didn't see a tree, he saw potential energy. He didn't see rocks, he saw a kinetic weapon. He scrambled upward, abandoning stealth for speed. His boots scrapped loudly against the stone. Contact. A shout from below. 12 o'clock high. Taking the shot. Crack. A bullet chipped the rock inches from Elias's face, sending stone splinters into his cheek. He didn't flinch. He lunged for the overhang, throwing his body over the lip of the ledge just as a second round sparked against the spot where his kidney had been a second before. He rolled onto the muddy shelf, safe for the moment from direct fire, but trapped. Suppressing fire. Automatic gunfire erupted from below, a chaotic staccato that chewed up the edge of the cliff, pinning him down. They were moving up. They would be on him in 5 minutes. Elias crawled toward the exposed roots of the oak tree, the boulders beneath it, some the size of watermelons, others the size of engine blocks, groaned under the shifting weight of the mud. He pulled his digging tool from his belt. It was a serrated steel trowel, good for cutting sod, useless against a rifle. But he wasn't attacking the men. He was attacking the mountain. He jammed the tool into the soil holding the main root cluster. He hacked at the wood. It was tough, living oak, but the erosion had done most of the work for him. "Come on down, old man." Vargas's voice taunted from below, closer now. "Make it easy on yourself." Elias gritted his teeth, sweat stinging his eyes. "Not today," he grunted. He found the keystone rock, a jagged chunk of limestone that was wedged under the main root ball, taking the brunt of the weight. He jammed his boot against it. He pushed. His legs screamed in protest. The rock didn't move. The gunfire stopped. They were climbing. He could hear their breathing, the clatter of gear against stone. "Sarah," he whispered. It was a prayer and a battle cry. He drew back his good leg and kicked the keystone with everything he had left. Crack. The rock shifted. The root snapped with the sound of a gunshot. For a second, nothing happened. Then, gravity took over. The entire shelf beneath the oak tree gave way. Tons of wet earth, shale, and massive boulders cascaded over the edge of the cliff in a terrifying, roaring avalanche. Elias scrambled back, clinging to the trunk of the tree as the ground fell away inches from his boots. Below, the shouts of the mercenaries turned into screams of surprise. The roar of the rockslide drowned out the thunder. It sounded like the mountain itself was clearing its throat. Dust and debris billowed up, choking the air. Elias coughed, peering over the edge. The path below was gone. In its place was a chaotic scar of fresh earth. He couldn't see the men, but he saw a rifle lying bent and broken on a rock. The pursuit had been halted, at least for now. But there was no time to celebrate. The slide had exposed his position to the drone he knew was still circling above the clouds. And the noise would draw every other team in the valley. He stood up, his legs trembling uncontrollably. The adrenaline dump was fading, leaving him hollow and shaking. He turned away from the cliff and stumbled into the mouth of a cave system that honeycombed the top of the ridge. It was darker inside, the air cool and damp. He turned on a small penlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. The cave walls were slick with moisture. He walked deep into the dark, putting layers of rock between him and the sky. He needed to rest, just for a minute. He found a dry alcove and slid down the wall, sitting on the dusty floor. He unclipped the heavy case and set it beside him. He rested his head against the cold stone, closing his eyes. "You did good, Dad." Elias opened his eyes. Sarah was sitting across from him. She was wearing the yellow sundress she had worn to her high school graduation. She looked clean, untouched by the rain or the mud. She was radiant. "Sarah?" Elias whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "You used the terrain," she said, smiling. "Just like you taught me when we went hunting. Look for the pinch points. Use the land." I found you," Elias stammered, tears mixing with the grime on his face. "I found the file. I'm taking you home." "I know," Sarah said softly, "but you're tired. You're bleeding." Elias looked down at his side. He hadn't noticed it before. The adrenaline had masked it, but his shirt was soaked in blood just above his hip. One of the bullets hadn't missed completely. It had grazed him, carving a deep furrow through the flesh. He touched it, and the pain arrived late but with a vengeance. He hissed, his vision swimming. "You have to bandage it," Sarah said. Her voice was echoing now, sounding like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. "If you don't, you'll bleed out before you reach the bridge." "I don't have a kit," Elias mumbled, his head lolling. "Yes, you do. Think. What did you tell me? Improvise." Elias blinked. The yellow dress flickered. Sarah wasn't there. It was just a stalagmite and the play of shadows from his penlight. He was hallucinating. The blood loss, the exhaustion, the stress, his mind was fracturing. But the hallucination was right. He had to stop the bleeding. He shrugged out of his heavy canvas jacket. He gripped the hem of his flannel shirt and tore a strip off the bottom. It wasn't sterile, but it was dry. He folded it into a pad. He took a swig of water from his canteen, his last few drops, and poured it over the wound to clean the worst of the grit. He bit down on his leather wallet to keep from screaming as the water hit raw nerve endings. He pressed the cloth pad against the wound and used his belt to cinch it tight. The pressure was agonizing, a throbbing pulse of fire, but it stemmed the flow. He sat there for a long time, breathing in the damp cave air. He checked his watch. 6:45 p.m. He had 5 hours to cover 8 miles of rough terrain to get to the suspension bridge. And he was wounded, and he was seeing ghosts. He looked at the titanium case. It felt heavier now, as if the souls trapped inside were adding their weight to the metal. "Why me?" he asked the darkness. "Because you're the only one who didn't look away," the darkness seemed to answer. A noise at the mouth of the cave made him freeze. It was faint, barely audible over the wind outside, but it was distinct. The click of a radio. They hadn't been stopped by the rockslide. They had just been slowed down, and now they had tracked him to the cave. Elias clicked off his penlight, plunging the world into absolute blackness. He picked up the case. He couldn't go back out the front. He had to go deeper. He had to hope that this cave had another exit, a back door that opened up on the other side of the ridge. If it didn't, if this was a dead end, then this cave would be his tomb. He began to move, feeling his way along the wall with his fingertips, shuffling into the suffocating dark of the mountain's throat. Behind him, the beams of tactical flashlights began to dance on the cave entrance walls, cutting slices of white light into his sanctuary. Blood trail, Vargas's voice echoed through the cavern, amplified by the acoustics. He's hit. He's inside. Elias moved faster, limping blindly into the abyss. The darkness inside the mountain was not simply an absence of light. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of heavy, damp air that pressed against Elias's eyeballs and filled his mouth with the taste of ancient dust and wet limestone. He had turned off his penlight the moment he heard the radio crackle at the cave entrance, plunging himself into a void so absolute that he lost all sense of up and down. For a terrifying moment, the only reality was the thumping of his own heart, a frantic drumbeat echoing in the cathedral of his ribs, and the searing, hot poker pain radiating from the bullet graze on his hip. He stood frozen, his back pressed against the cold, slimy wall of the cavern, forcing his breathing into a shallow, silent rhythm. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, silent. He was no longer a man. He was a part of the rock, a shadow within a shadow. 50 yards back, near the mouth of the cave, the world shifted. Beams of white light, sharp and cutting as scalpels, sliced through the gloom. They danced across the stalactites hanging from the ceiling like the teeth of a leviathan, creating long, distorted shadows that swung wildly with every movement of the men holding the weapons. Spread out. Vargas's voice drifted down the tunnel. The acoustics of the cave distorted the sound, stripping it of its direction, making it sound like it was coming from everywhere at once. Watch your footing. The floor is slick. And watch the ceiling. He might try to bring it down on us. Elias closed his eyes, visualizing the cave system. He hadn't been in these specific tunnels since he was a teenager, a reckless boy exploring with a flashlight and a rope, but the geology of the Ozarks followed a logic. The water always sought the lowest point. The air currents moved from high pressure to low. If he wanted to find a way out that wasn't the front door, he had to follow the wind. He felt a faint draft against his wet cheek. It was cold, smelling of ozone and rushing water. Deeper. He began to move. He didn't walk, he slid. He kept one hand on the wall, his fingertips reading the texture of the stone. Slick flowstone here, rough breakdown piles there, while his feet shuffled inches at a time to test the floor. The titanium case was a burden of immense cruelty. It banged against his wounded hip, threw off his balance, and snagged on outcroppings. Every scrape of metal against stone sounded like a gunshot in the silence, causing him to freeze and wait for the inevitable shout of discovery. But the shouting didn't come. The mercenaries were moving cautiously, checking every alcove, their boots crunching on the gravel. They were thorough, which was good. Thorough meant slow. Elias reached a fork in the tunnel. To the left, the air was stagnant. To the right, the draft was stronger, but the ceiling dropped drastically. It was a squeeze, a narrow fissure where the rock layers had shifted. He chose the right. He had to crouch, then crawl. The tunnel narrowed until it was barely 2 feet high. The crushing weight of the mountain was now literally inches above his spine. Panic, primal and electric, sparked in his chest. Claustrophobia, the fear of being buried alive. It was the miner's nightmare, the soldier's dread. He pushed the case ahead of him, dragging his body over the wet clay floor. The walls pressed in on his shoulders. He could hear his own breath rasping, loud and ragged. Stuck. The case jammed between 2 rock formations. Elias pushed. It didn't move. He pulled. It held fast. He was trapped in a stone coffin, hundreds of feet underground, with killers behind him and a dead end in front. I found a blood trail. A voice echoed from behind. Closer now. Much closer. Heading into the fissure at 2 o'clock. Fragate. Another voice suggested. Negative, Vargas snapped. We need the drive intact. Go in after him. Henderson, take point. You're the smallest. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, sweat mixing with the mud on his face. He couldn't die here. not wedged in a crack like a rat. He thought of Sarah. He thought of the letter. I was coming back. He gritted his teeth and shoved the case with a violent, desperate surge of strength, screaming silently in his throat. There was a sickening scrape of metal on stone, a spark that flashed briefly in the dark, and then the case popped free. Elias scrambled after it, tearing his shirt, scraping the skin off his elbows, pulling himself through the bottleneck until the ceiling suddenly vaulted upward. He tumbled out of the squeeze and onto a ledge. The sound of the space opened up, a vast, hollow echo. He was in a large chamber, and he heard it, the sound he had been praying for and dreading in equal measure. Water. A low, thunderous roar rose from the darkness below. An underground river. The ghost river the old-timers talked about. A subterranean artery that drained the ridge during storms. Elias fumbled for his penlight. He knew he shouldn't use it, but he had to see. He cupped the beam with his hand, allowing only a sliver of light to escape. He was standing on a narrow shelf of slippery rock. 10 feet below him, black water churned violently, white foam visible even in the dim light. The river was swollen by the storm outside, a raging torrent rushing through the bowels of the mountain. There was no bridge. There was no path along the bank. The tunnel ended here. The only way forward was the water. Thorn! The shout came from the squeeze he had just exited. A beam of light shot out of the hole, sweeping the chamber. It caught Elias's legs. Contact. He's at the ledge. Bullets sparked against the rock face inches from Elias's head. The crack of the rifles in the enclosed space was deafening, a physical slam against the eardrums. Elias didn't think. He didn't calculate. He grabbed the handle of the titanium case, hugged it to his chest like a life preserver, though he knew it was an anchor, and stepped off the ledge. The cold was instantaneous and paralyzing. It wasn't just water. It was liquid ice, runoff from the deep springs. It punched the air from his lungs and tightened his muscles into knots. The current grabbed him with the force of a freight train, spinning him around, slamming his shoulder against a submerged rock. The world became a chaotic swirl of black water and bubbles. He didn't know which way was up. The weight of the case dragged him down, pulling him toward the bottom where the jagged rocks waited. Let go, his survival instinct screamed. Drop the case. Swim. Live. His fingers loosened on the handle. It would be so easy. Just let it sink. He could surface, gasp for air, let the current carry him out. But then he saw the face of the girl in the photo. He saw Martha lying in the hospital bed. He saw the faces of the girls in the files, the assets sold like cattle. If he dropped this case, their stories drowned with it. The truth drowned, and Elias Thorne would survive. But he would be nothing but a husk, a man who bought his life with their silence. No, he gripped the handle tighter. He kicked his legs, fighting the down current. He managed to break the surface, gasping a lungful of spray and air before the river pulled him under again. He was being tumbled through a siphon, a submerged tunnel where the water filled the entire passage. For 10 seconds, an eternity, he was in total darkness, holding his breath, battering against the walls, the case banging against his bruised ribs. Then the pressure released. He shot out of the side of the mountain like a cork from a bottle. He landed in a deep pool at the base of a waterfall, the impact stunning him. He flailed, coughing up water, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. The storm outside was still raging, but compared to the violence of the underground river, the rain felt gentle. He dragged himself toward the bank. His boots felt like they were filled with lead. He clawed at the mud, pulling his body inch by inch out of the water until he collapsed on the grassy verge, shivering violently. Hypothermia. He knew the signs. The uncontrollable shaking, the confusion, the desire to just close his eyes and sleep. He checked the case. It was still clutched in his left hand. His fingers locked around the handle in a death grip he couldn't unclench. Move, he commanded his legs. Move, you son of a bitch. He forced himself to stand. The world tilted. He vomited river water and bile onto the grass. He looked around. He was on the north side of the ridge, about a mile from the suspension bridge. The storm was breaking. The clouds were thinning, revealing a bruised purple sky where the moon fought to shine through. He began to walk. It was a staggering, zombie-like shuffle. Every step sent a jolt of agony through his hip and his freezing muscles. He was leaving a trail of water and blood, but the rain was washing it away as fast as he made it. The forest here was different, older, thicker. The trees loomed like silent sentinels watching a dead man walking. As he neared the ravine that the suspension bridge spanned, Elias stopped. He needed to check the rendezvous. He couldn't just walk out onto the bridge blindly. Not after the ambush at the farm. Not after the drones. He veered off the path, climbing a small knoll that overlooked the bridge approach. He lay flat in the wet ferns, pulling a pair of compact binoculars from his jacket pocket. Miraculously unbroken. He wiped the lenses and looked down. The bridge was an old iron and wood structure, swaying slightly in the wind. On the far side, parked on the access road, was a black sedan, an unmarked government car. Leaning against the hood was a man. Even from this distance, Elias recognized the posture. It was Assistant Director Miller. He was wearing a windbreaker, looking at his watch, pacing nervously. It looked right. It looked like salvation. But then Elias swept the binoculars to the left, into the treeline surrounding the bridge. Movement. A figure in tactical gear, blending perfectly with the shadows, shifted position behind a fallen log. He was holding a sniper rifle, the barrel trained not on the far side of the bridge where the cartel would come from, but on the near side, where Elias would step out. Elias swept to the right. Another heat signature. Another sniper. They weren't setting up a defensive perimeter to protect him. They were setting up a kill box. Elias lowered the binoculars, his heart sinking into his stomach. The cold he felt now had nothing to do with the river. Miller wasn't there to extract him. Miller was the leak. Or if he wasn't the leak, he was compromised. The cleanup crew wasn't here to arrest the cartel. They were here to erase the loose ends. And Elias was the biggest loose end of all. The phone conversation played back in his mind. Miller had been too eager, too precise about the location, the only choke point in the valley. He had walked 10 miles through hell, fought off mercenaries, survived a rock slide, and drowned in a mountain, only to deliver himself to the executioner. A laugh bubbled up in his throat, hysterical and jagged. He clamped his hand over his mouth. He looked at the titanium case, the evidence, the truth. If he walked onto that bridge, he died and the case vanished. If he turned back, Vargas and his team would catch him in the woods within the hour. He was pinned between the hammer and the anvil. Elias looked at the bridge again. He looked at the rushing water of the river far below it. He looked at the sniper. He needed a third option. He needed to change the game. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the flare gun he had kept in his survival vest. An old marine-grade launcher with a single red shell. He had almost thrown it away to save weight. He cracked the barrel open, checked the shell, and snapped it shut. He wasn't going to surrender, and he wasn't going to run. He stood up on the knoll, silhouetted against the breaking storm clouds. He raised the flare gun, not aiming at the sky, but aiming at the dry brush pile he had noticed near the base of the bridge's wooden support pylons on his side of the ravine. "Let's see how much you want this," Elias whispered. He pulled the trigger. The flare hissed out, a streak of magnesium fire cutting through the night. It slammed into the brush pile. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the oil-soaked wood, creosote-treated timbers of the old bridge supports caught. Fire erupted. Down at the bridge, Miller's head snapped up. The snipers broke cover, pointing their rifles toward the ridge. Elias stepped back into the shadows, clutching the case. He had started a fire. Now he had to move through the smoke. The bridge was the only way across the ravine, and he was about to make it the most dangerous place on Earth. He began to descend toward the burning structure, his eyes hard, his soul cold. The old man who dug for gold was dead in the cave. The man who walked down the hill now was something else entirely. He was a father with a debt to pay. The magnesium flare didn't just start a fire. It awoke a monster. The ancient creosote, soaked deep into the timber pilings of the Iron Creek suspension bridge over decades of humid summers and freezing winters, caught with a ferocity that defied the damp night. One moment, the ravine was a pit of ink and rain. The next, it was a throat of roaring orange light. The flames spiraled upward, licking at the rusted iron cables, casting long, frantic shadows that danced against the canyon walls like spirits released from the earth. Elias Thorne didn't run from the fire. He walked toward it. He moved with the eerie, disjointed gait of a man whose body had long since quit, leaving only his will to pilot the machinery of his bones. The heat hit him first, a physical wall that dried the rain on his face instantly and singed the hair on his arms. Smoke billowed up, thick and oily, tasting of tar and burning history. It was the perfect screen. The thermal scopes of the snipers he had spotted would be blinded by the intense heat signature of the blaze. Their night vision would be washed out by the blinding magnesium white. He stepped onto the wooden planks of the bridge. The structure groaned under his weight, a low, metallic moan that vibrated through the soles of his boots. The bridge was narrow, barely wide enough for a single car, suspended 100 feet above the swollen, churning river he had just escaped. Now the river reflected the inferno above, looking like a flow of molten lava. "Hold your fire!" A voice screamed from the far side, barely audible over the roar of the flames. "I can't see the target. The optics are washed out." Elias kept walking. He reached the center of the span, the point of no return. The suspension cables hummed with tension, the heat making the metal expand and sing. He stopped. He was suspended in the void, fire beneath him, darkness above, and death on both sides. He unslung the titanium case from his shoulder. It felt impossibly heavy, an anchor of sins. He set it down on the swaying planks at his feet. "Miller!" Elias roared. His voice was raw, scraped clean by smoke and exhaustion, but it carried the authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. "I know you're there." On the far bank, the silhouette of the black sedan was backlit by the flickering light. A figure detached itself from the car, shielding its face from the heat. Assistant Director Miller walked to the edge of the bridge abutment, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Elias!" Miller shouted back, his voice cracking with a strange, desperate franticness. "Step away from the fire. Bring the case to me. We can still end this." "End it?" Elias laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "You have snipers in the trees, Miller. You didn't come here to extract me. You came to bury me." Miller took a step onto the bridge. He looked terrified, not of Elias but of something else. "It's not what you think, Elias. Please, just give me the drive. They have my son. They're watching right now. If I don't walk away with that case, my boy dies." Elias froze. The wind whipped the smoke around him, momentarily revealing Miller's face. The FBI agent wasn't wearing the mask of a cold-blooded killer. He was wearing the face of a father, pale, sweating, eyes wide with the same primal panic Elias had felt when he read Sarah's letter. The tragedy of it struck Elias like a physical blow. The enemy wasn't just a cartel. It was a contagion. It turned good men into pawns. It used love as a weapon. "I'm sorry about your boy, Miller," Elias shouted, the flames rising higher, heating the iron railings until they were painful to touch. "But this box, it's full of other people's children. Thousands of them. If I give it to you, you'll destroy it to save one life. I can't let you do that." "I have no choice," Miller screamed, drawing his gun but pointing it shakily at the ground. "Don't make me do this." "You always have a choice," Elias said softly, though the wind carried the words away. Click. The sound was small, mechanical, and terrifyingly close. Came from behind Elias. He turned slowly. Emerging from the smoke on the side of the bridge Elias had just come from was Vargas. The mercenary leader was charred and bloody. He had survived the rockslide, survived the trek, and walked through the edge of the fire to get here. His tactical vest was torn, his face a mask of soot and fresh blood, but his rifle was raised and steady. "Touching scene," Vargas rasped. He didn't look at Miller. His eyes were locked on the titanium case. But the negotiation is over. Elias stood between them. The bridge was a seesaw of power. On one end, a compromised father with the weight of the federal government behind him. On the other, a ruthless killer with a paycheck to earn. In the middle, an old farmer with a box of secrets. "Drop the gun, Miller," Vargas barked, not taking his aim off Elias's chest. "Or I drop the old man, take the case, and leave you to explain the mess to your superiors." Miller hesitated, his gun wavering. "You work for the cartel," Miller stammered. "If I let you take it. If you let me take it, your son goes home tonight," Vargas lied. The lie was smooth, practiced. "We just want our property. The old man is collateral damage." Elias looked at Vargas, then at Miller. He looked down at the raging river below. The heat was becoming unbearable. The wooden planks near the far pylon were beginning to smoke. The bridge was dying. "He's lying, Miller," Elias said calmly. "He leaves no loose ends. You know that. Once he has the case, he kills me, then he kills you to scrub the scene. And your son, he's already gone." "Shut up," Vargas snarled, tightening his finger on the trigger. "Count of 3, old man. Kick the case over to me." 1, Vargas counted. Elias looked at the case. He looked at the biometric lock he had stared at in the woods. 2, Elias's mind raced. He was a combat engineer. He knew about stress points. He knew about fulcrums. He looked at the main suspension cable running knee-high along the bridge. It was glowing a dull red where the fire licked it. Tension, heat, weakness. He didn't kick the case to Vargas. 3, Elias dropped to his knees, grabbing the handle of the case with both hands. But instead of sliding it, he swung it. Not at Vargas and not at Miller. He swung it at the railing. "No!" Miller screamed. Elias wasn't trying to throw it off. He was using the momentum. He spun his body, using the heavy case as a counterweight, and hurled himself and the box toward the edge of the bridge, but not over it. He slammed the titanium corner of the case into the superheated, tension-loaded vertical suspender cable holding this section of the bridge up. The cable, already weakened by the fire, couldn't take the sudden, sharp impact of the hardened titanium alloy. Pang! The sound was like a cannon shot. The cable snapped. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The bridge buckled. The floor dropped 5 feet in a split second, tilting violently to the left. Vargas, caught off guard, lost his footing. He slid across the slick, wet planks, his rifle firing a burst of rounds into the night sky. He scrambled for purchase, his boots seeking a grip, but the angle was too steep. With a shout of rage, the mercenary slid under the railing and plummeted into the darkness and fire below. Elias slammed into the railing, the breath driven from his lungs. His arm was wrenched violently as the weight of the case tried to drag him over the edge, but he held on. He was dangling over the abyss, his legs kicking in empty air, his left hand gripping the scorching iron of the railing, his right hand locked onto the case. The bridge groaned, a second cable snapping. The whole structure began to twist. Miller had fallen to his knees, clinging to a support beam on the stable end of the bridge. He stared at Elias, wide-eyed. "Elias!" Miller shouted. "Drop it! Pull yourself up!" Elias looked up at the agent. The fire was climbing the pylons now. The bridge had seconds left before the main span gave way entirely. "Catch!" Elias wheezed. He wasn't going to save himself. He knew that. His hip was shattered, his strength gone. He was dead weight. But the truth had to survive. With a primal scream that tore his throat, Elias swung the case. He didn't pull himself up. He used his last ounce of strength to heave the titanium box upward, sliding it across the tilted deck toward Miller. The case skidded across the wet planks, sparking against the iron, and came to rest at Miller's knees. Miller stared at it. He looked at Elias, who was now slipping, his grip on the railing failing. "Do the right thing," Elias whispered. Then the railing gave way. Elias didn't scream as he fell. He simply let go. He watched the bridge recede above him, a line of fire in the sky. He saw Miller grab the case. He saw the black sky turn over. And then he hit the water. The impact was like hitting concrete. Darkness swallowed him instantly. The current of the ghost river, swollen and violent, grabbed him and dragged him down, tumbling him over the rocks, pulling him away from the fire, away from the pain, deep into the cold, silent embrace of the earth. The silence in the FBI field office was absolute. Assistant Director Miller stood in the center of the chaos on the bridge approach. The fire was dying down, hissed into submission by the fire crews. The bridge was a twisted skeleton of iron hanging in the ravine. Miller held the titanium case. His knuckles were white. A black helicopter, unmarked, roared overhead, its searchlight sweeping the river. "Sir," a younger agent approached Miller cautiously. "We have a secure line to Washington. The director wants an update, and the private security team is asking for the package." Miller looked at the case. He looked at the river where the old man had vanished. He thought of his son. He thought of the thousands of sons and daughters in the digital files under his hand. Elias had given him a choice. You always have a choice. Miller looked at the private security team. Men in suits standing by an SUV, watching him like vultures. They were the ones holding the leash. If he walked over to them, he was safe. Slowly, Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. Not the director. Not his wife. He dialed the news desk of the Washington Post. "My name is Assistant Director Miller," he said, his voice steady for the first time in years. "I have a story, and I have the evidence. I'm sending a copy to you, to the Times, and to the Attorney General's private server. Right now." He tapped the screen. "Send all." The men by the SUV realized what was happening. They reached for their weapons. "Federal agents," Miller shouted, raising his own gun, pointing it directly at the men who held his life in their hands. "Arrest those men. Obstruction of justice and conspiracy." The young agents around him hesitated for a heartbeat. Then, seeing the look in Miller's eyes, they drew their weapons and swarmed the SUV. Miller fell to his knees, clutching the case to his chest, and wept. He had lost his career. He might still lose his family. But for the first time, he was clean. Downriver, 3 miles away, the body washed up on a sandbar. It was battered, broken, pale as moonlight. The water lapped gently at the face of Elias Thorne. He lay there for a long time, motionless. A raccoon skittered out of the brush, sniffing at his boot. Then a finger twitched. A cough. A ragged, choking sound. Water spilled from his lungs. Elias rolled onto his side, vomiting river water and mud. He gasped, the air burning his throat like fire. He was alive, broken, ruined, destitute, but alive. He looked up at the sky. The storm had passed. The stars were out. They were bright, cold, and beautiful. He tried to stand and failed. He dragged himself up the sandbar, inch by inch, until he reached the dry grass. He lay on his back, staring at the constellations. He didn't have the gold. He didn't have the farm. He closed his eyes and saw Sarah. She wasn't turning away this time. She was smiling. "I'm coming, baby," he whispered to the stars. "I told you, I'm coming back." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. But they weren't the sirens of the hunters. They were the sirens of the rescue. The sterile hum of the intensive care unit was a stark, jarring contrast to the cacophony of the dying bridge. There was no roaring fire here, no screaming metal, no thundering river. Only the rhythmic, persistent beep-hiss-beep of machines breathing for people who had forgotten how to do it themselves. Elias Thorne floated in a white void for what felt like days. Sometimes he was back in the water, the cold crushing his chest. Sometimes he was digging in the red clay, but every shovelful of dirt turned into gold coins that dissolved into blood. And sometimes he saw her, Sarah. She wasn't the teenager storming off the porch, and she wasn't the battered woman in the file. She was a child again, sitting on his shoulders as they walked through the high pines, her hands sticky with sap, pointing at a hawk circling the thermal currents. "Look, Daddy, he's free." When Elias finally opened his eyes for real, the The first thing he saw was the cracks in the ceiling tiles. They looked like rivers on a map. He tried to sit up, but his body screamed. A chorus of agony erupted from his hip, his ribs, and his shoulder. He collapsed back onto the pillow, gasping, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. "Easy, Mr. Thorne. Easy." A nurse appeared, checking the 4 lines running into his arm like translucent vines. She looked at him with a strange expression. Not just professional detachment, but something bordering on awe. "You've been out for 3 days," she said softly. "Hypothermia, a shattered pelvis, 3 broken ribs, and exhaustion that would have killed a man half your age. You're a medical miracle." Elias licked his cracked lips. His throat felt like he had swallowed a handful of gravel. "Martha?" he rasped. It was less a word and more a vibration of air. The nurse smiled, stepping aside. In the chair by the window, bathed in the soft morning light, sat Martha. She looked frail, her skin the color of parchment, the oxygen cannula looped behind her ears. But she was sitting up. She was awake, and her eyes, usually clouded with the fatigue of her own battle, were sharp and wet with tears. She didn't speak. She just reached out a trembling hand. Elias fought through the pain to reach back. Their fingers intertwined, calloused, rough skin meeting paper-thin fragility. A lifetime of holding hands, from the altar to the tractor to the hospital bed. "You look like hell, old man," Martha whispered, her voice a dry rustle. "I feel like it." Elias managed a weak smile. Did I make it?" Martha squeezed his hand. She picked up the remote control from the bedside table and pointed it at the television mounted on the wall. "See for yourself." The screen flickered to life. It was CNN. The banner at the bottom of the screen was bold, red, and scrolling fast. "Operation Red Dust. Fallout continues." The anchor, a woman with a serious face, was standing in front of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. "The total number of arrests has now surpassed 400, the reporter was saying. "The data released 2 days ago, now known as the Thorne Files, has dismantled the Midwest logistical hub of the Sinaloa Cartel. But the shockwaves are reaching much higher. 3 state senators, a federal judge, and the Deputy Director of Homeland Security have been indicted on charges of conspiracy and human trafficking. It is being called the single largest intelligence leak in criminal history, exposing a decade-long network of corruption." The screen cut to footage of a raid, FBI agents in windbreakers leading men in expensive suits out of a glass office building in handcuffs. The source of the leak, the reporter continued, remains officially unidentified, though sources say the data was recovered from a cold storage site in the Ozark Mountains by a private citizen. Elias stared at the screen. The men in suits, the judges, the people who thought they were untouchable. They were falling. The castle built on bones was collapsing. "You did that," Martha whispered. "You tore it all down." Elias turned off the TV. The silence rushed back in, but it felt lighter now. "I didn't do it for them," he said. "I did it for Sarah." Martha's face crumbled. The strength she had been holding onto finally broke. She leaned her head against the bed rail, her shoulders shaking. "Miller told me," she sobbed softly. "He came here yesterday. He told me you found her file. He told me she was coming home." Elias closed his eyes, letting his own tears flow hot and fast. "I was coming back," he whispered the words from the letter. "She didn't leave us, Martha. They took her. But she fought. She wrote that letter hoping we'd find it." They cried together for a long time, grieving the decade of silence, the lost birthdays, the empty chair at the table. But beneath the grief, there was a profound, settling peace. The question mark that had hung over their lives for 10 years had been straightened into a period. The story had an ending. It wasn't the happy ending they had prayed for, but it was the truth. And the truth was the only thing that could heal the wound. 2 weeks later, the reality of the living began to encroach on the peace of the survivors. Elias was discharged in a wheelchair. His hip was pinned together with titanium screws. Ironic, he thought, considering the box that had caused it. The doctors said he would walk again, but he would never work the farm the way he used to. Not that it mattered. On the day of his release, Mr. Henderson from the bank was waiting in the hospital lobby. He held a leather briefcase and wore the uncomfortable expression of a man who has to shoot a loyal dog. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, wringing his hands. I saw the news about what happened up on the bridge. The whole town is talking about it. They say you're a hero." "A hero with a mortgage," Elias said flatly, adjusting the blanket over his knees. "Spit it out, Jim. Is it today?" Henderson looked down at his polished shoes. "The foreclosure process is automated, Elias. You know that. The grace period ended 3 days ago. The head office in Chicago. They don't watch the news. They just watch the ledger. I tried to get an extension, but it's fine," Elias said. He felt Martha's hand tighten on his shoulder where she stood behind the wheelchair. "It's just dirt, Jim. Just red dirt and rocks. We'll find a small apartment in town. As long as I have Martha, I'm rich enough." He meant it. He really did. The farm had been his identity for 65 years, but after the cave, after the river, he realized that land was just the stage, not the play. The play was the people you loved. "I'm so sorry, Elias," Henderson said, handing him a thick envelope. "This is the eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Elias took the envelope. Felt light. Lighter than the titanium case. Lighter than a shovel. "Let's go, Martha," he said. They moved toward the automatic doors, the bright sunlight of the parking lot blinding them after weeks of fluorescent purgatory. Elias squinted, shielding his eyes. A black sedan was parked at the curb. Not a bank car. Not a taxi. Leaning against it was a man in jeans and a flannel shirt. He looked different without the suit, without the badge, without the weight of a double life crushing his spine. It was Miller. He looked tired, aged 10 years in 2 weeks, but his eyes were clear. There were no handcuffs, but there was an ankle monitor bulging under the hem of his jeans. "I thought you'd be in a federal cell," Elias said as Martha pushed him closer. "I'm working on it," Miller said with a wry, sad smile. "Turns out, when you hand the Justice Department the biggest win of the century, they cut you a deal. Witness protection for the family. 5 years in a minimum security for me. I turn myself in tomorrow." "You came to say goodbye?" Elias asked. "I came to finish the transaction," Miller said. He reached into the back seat of the car and pulled out a small cardboard box. It wasn't the titanium case. It was an ordinary shipping box. He placed it gently on Elias's lap. "The government seized the cartel's assets," Miller said. "Billions of dollars. But that money is tied up in litigation. It'll be years before anyone sees a dime of it. And there are no official rewards for vigilante actions that involve destroying federal infrastructure." Elias looked at the box. "Then what is this?" "I told the reporter," Miller said softly. "When I leaked the story, I told her about you. I told her about the man who burned a bridge to save the truth. I told her you were losing your farm to save strangers." Miller nodded at the box. "Open it." Elias tore the tape. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, envelopes of all sizes, colors, and stamps. "The reporter set up a fund," Miller explained, his voice thick with emotion. "She called it the Red Dust Fund. People from all over the country, parents of missing children, people who were trafficked and survived, people who just wanted to believe that good men still exist. They sent $5, $10, $1,000. Miller pulled a bank check from his pocket and laid it on top of the letters. $350,000, Elias. It's not $2 million. It's not cartel blood money. It's clean. Every cent of it came from a thank you." Elias stared at the check. The numbers swam in his vision. 350,000. Enough to pay off the mortgage. Enough to send Martha to the specialist in Zurich. Enough to fix the roof and buy a new tractor he would never drive. He picked up one of the letters at random. It was written in crayon. "Thank you for saving my big sister." Elias broke. He didn't weep like he had in the cave. This was different. This was a release of the tension he had carried in his marrow for a lifetime. He covered his face with his hands, sobbing into the palms that had dug the holes and held the guns. Martha wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Miller stood by, watching the couple, tears streaming silently down his own face. "You saved the farm, Elias?" Martha whispered. "No," Elias choked out, looking at the letters at the crayon drawing. "They did." Miller cleared his throat, wiping his eyes. "There's one more thing," he said. "In the trunk." Elias looked up. Miller walked to the back of the car and popped the trunk. He didn't take anything out. He just stood there, waiting. "We brought her back, Elias," Miller said softly. "The coroner in Little Rock released her to you this morning. I offered to drive her down." Elias signaled Martha to stop the wheelchair. He pushed the wheels himself, ignoring the pain in his hip, rolling toward the back of the sedan. There, in the trunk, sat a simple, polished urn made of cherry wood. It was small, too small to hold a life as big as Sarah's. But it was there. Elias reached out and touched the smooth wood. It was warm from the sun. "Hello, baby girl," he whispered. "Welcome home." The funeral was held 3 days later, on the highest hill of the Thorn farm. It was a clear day. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving a blue so deep it felt like you could fall into it. The wind was gentle, rustling the high grass that waved like a golden ocean. There was no priest. Elias didn't want one. He didn't need anyone to translate for him to God. He and God had had a long conversation in that cave, and they understood each other now. There were no news crews. Elias had forbidden it. This wasn't a national event. This was a family dinner. But they weren't alone. As Elias stood by the open grave, a small, square hole he had dug himself, refusing help despite his injury, leaning on his shovel with trembling determination. He looked down at the farm road. Cars were lined up for a mile. Old pickup trucks, battered sedans, shiny SUVs. People were walking up the hill. They didn't come close. They respected the circle. They stood 100 yards away, forming a ring around the hill. Hundreds of them. The townspeople who had called him a crazy fool. The shopkeepers. The sheriff who had looked the other way, now standing with his hat in his hands, head bowed in shame and respect. And strangers. Faces he didn't know, people who had driven for hours just to stand witness. Martha sat in her wheelchair right beside the grave, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the garden Sarah used to tend. Elias placed the urn into the earth. He didn't say a prayer. He just spoke to the dirt. "You go on and rest now, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying on the wind. "You stopped running. You did good. You brought the truth home." He picked up a handful of the red Ozark dust. It was the same dirt he had cursed for being too rocky, too poor to grow corn. But now, as he crumbled it in his fingers, he saw it differently. It was the dirt that had hidden the secret. It was the dirt that had protected him in the cave. It was the dirt that would hold his daughter. It wasn't poor soil. It was strong. It was enduring. He let the red dust fall onto the urn. Dust to dust. "I love you," he whispered. He began to fill the grave. The rhythmic scrape of the shovel was the only sound on the hill. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. It was the sound of his life. When it was done, Elias planted a small marker. Not a stone, a sapling, a young oak tree, taken from the roots of the one that had saved his life on the ridge. He stepped back and took Martha's hand. The crowd in the distance began to disperse, fading away like ghosts, leaving the family alone. Elias looked out over the valley. He saw the scars on the land where the bridge had burned. He saw the dark mouth of Devil's Throat. He saw the sun glinting off the roof of his barn. He was tired. His body was broken. He was an old man with a limp and a dying wife. But as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and soft purple, Elias Thorne felt a sensation he hadn't felt in 10 years. He felt light. The weight of the box was gone. The weight of the secret was gone. The weight of the grief was not gone but changed. It wasn't a stone around his neck anymore. It was a part of him, like his heartbeat, like his breath. "What do we do now, Eli?" Martha asked, watching the sunset. Elias looked at her, then at the fresh earth of Sarah's grave, and finally at the horizon where the future waited. "We live, Martha," Elias said, turning the wheelchair back toward the house where the lights were just coming on, warm and inviting against the dusk. "We just live." And beneath the red dust of the Ozarks, the secrets slept, and the roots of the new oak tree began to drink the rain, preparing to grow tall, strong, and silent.